Chapter 2, Conversation with my son. Having trekked from the river the whole way to Anastasia's glade, all on my own, I felt right at home as I approached the familiar places. This time nobody was there to greet me. It even gave me a good feeling to walk through the taiga, all on my own without a guide. I wasn't about to cry out or call Anastasia's name. Perhaps she was occupied with her own affairs. When she was free, she would feel my presence and come to me on her own. Spying my favorite spot on the lakeshore where Anastasia and I were wont to spend time together, I decided I would change my clothes first before sitting down and relaxing after my trip. I took out of my backpack a dark gray, wrinkle-resistant suit, a thin white sweater, and a new pair of comfortable shoes. In getting ready for my trip, I had also thought of taking along a white shirt and tie, but then decided that the shirt would only get wrinkled and there would be no place to iron it in the taiga. But I had the suit packed in the store so that it wouldn't wrinkle. I decided I should present myself to my son in a solemn, elegant manner, and so I spent a great deal of time and effort in thinking about my outward appearance. I had brought along a battery-powered razor and a mirror. Resting the mirror on a tree branch, I proceeded to shave and comb my hair. Then I sat down on a small hillock, took out my notepad and pen to round out my plan for meeting my son with some thoughts that had come to me along the way. My son will soon be 5 years old. Of course, he can talk already. The last time I saw him, he was still very little. He wasn't talking yet, but by now there must be a lot of things he can understand. He probably natters on with Anastasia and his grandfathers for days on end. I had it all set in my mind just as soon as I saw Anastasia. I would let her know how I had planned out my meeting with our son and what I would say to him. For the past 5 years, I had been diligently studying all the various systems of child raising, taking from them what I considered to be the best and the easiest to understand. After talking with educational experts and child psychologists, I had arrived at the conclusions I needed for myself. Now, before meeting with my son, I wanted to talk with Anastasia about these conclusions, along with the plan that I had worked out. To think through everything once again in detail, this time with her. Perhaps Anastasia could suggest what first words I should say to him, and what pose to adopt while saying them. I had decided the pose was important too, since a father should appear to his son as a significant person. But first, Anastasia had to introduce me to him. The first point on my notepad read, Anastasia presents me to my son. All she had to do was introduce me with some simple words such as, "Here, son, here before you is your birth father." But she had to say them quite solemnly, so that our son would be able to feel from her tone of voice that his father's significant, and subsequently treat him with respect. All at once I felt everything around become quiet, as though put on alert. The sudden onset of silence didn't frighten me. This always happened every time I met Anastasia in the taiga. The taiga and all of its residents literally froze, listening, watching and deciding whether the newcomer might have brought their mistress any kind of unpleasantness. Then, if no aggression were detected, everything would calm down. I surmised from the ensuing silence that Anastasia had quietly approached me from behind. It wasn't a difficult thing to sense her presence, especially since I always experienced something like a warming sensation in my back, something only Anastasia was capable of producing with her look. I didn't turn around right away, but continued sitting there for some time, luxuriating in the pleasant and cheering warmth. Finally I turned, and lo and behold, there before me was standing my little son, his bare feet firmly planted on the ground. He had grown. His strawberry blonde hair was already falling in curls down to his shoulders. He was dressed in a collarless shirt woven from nettle fibers. His features resembled those of Anastasia's, perhaps mine too, though this was not obvious at first glance. Turning to face him, my hands were pressed against the ground. I found myself on all fours, watching him intently, oblivious to everything else in the world. He, in turn, kept his eyes silently trained on me, watching me with Anastasia's kind gaze. Perhaps the unexpectedness of it all would have continued to prevent me from saying anything for a long time, but he was the first to speak. "Greetings to your bright thoughts, my dear Papa." "Eh? And greetings, of course, to you as well," I responded. "Forgive me, Papa." "Forgive you for what?" "For interrupting your important reflections. I've been standing at a distance, so as to not interfere, but I wanted to come and be close to you. Please, Papa, let me sit down next to you, quietly, until you've completed your reflections." "Eh? Okay, sure, have a seat." He quickly approached, sat down 1/2 meter away, and didn't move a muscle. I continued kneeling distractedly on all fours. As he was settling in, I managed to think, "I must adopt a deep thought pose while I finish my reflections," as he put it. I need to think of what to do next. I took up what I thought was a dignified pose, and for a while we just sat there side by side without saying a word. Then I turned to my little son and I asked him, "Well, how are things going with you?" Upon hearing my voice, he gave a joyful start, turned to me, and looked me straight in the eye. His look told me he felt tense, not knowing how to answer my simple question. But finally he responded, "I cannot, Papa, give you an answer to your question. I do not know how things are going. Dear Papa, life is going on. It is something very good that life is." Somehow I've got to carry on this conversation, I thought. I can't afford to lose the momentum. And so I thought him another traditional question. "Well, how are you doing here? Are you minding your mama?" This time he replied at once, "I am always happy to mind my mama when she speaks. And when my grandfathers speak, it is interesting to listen to them too. I talk to them as well, and they listen to me. But Mama Anastasia thinks I talk too much. I ought to think more," says Mama Anastasia. "But my thoughts come very quickly, and I want to talk differently." "What do you mean, talk differently?" "Like my grandfathers. I want to arrange my words, one after the other, like Mama does, and like you do, Papa." "And how do you know how I arrange my words?" "Mama showed me. I get very interested when Mama starts talking with your words." "Really? Wow. Well, what do you want to be?" Again, this very ordinary question, which adults frequently ask of children, was apparently beyond his understanding. After a brief pause, he replied, "But I already am, Papa." "I know that you are, but I meant, what do you want to become? When you grow up, what are you going to do?" "I shall be you, Papa. When I grow up, I shall carry on what you do now." "And how do you know what I do?" "Mama Anastasia told me." "And what has she been telling you about me?" "A whole lot. Mama Anastasia tells me that you're such a... what is the word? Oh yes, I remember. That you're such a hero, my dear Papa." "A hero?" "Yes. It is hard for you. Mama wants life to be easier for you. She wants you to be able to rest in normal conditions for man, but you go to a place where many people find it very hard to live. That is why you go away, to do good to people there. I was very sad to learn that there are people who do not have their own blade, and they are always being frightened and made to live in a way that they themselves do not want. They cannot pick their own food. They have to, work, is what I think it's called. They have to not do what they want themselves, but what someone tells them to do. And for this, they are given paper, or money, and they exchange this money for food. They have simply forgotten a bit how it is possible to live otherwise and enjoy life. And you, Papa, you go to that place where it is hard for people to live, to bring good to the people there." Yes, I do go there." there should be good everywhere. But how do you plan to carry on with the good? How are you preparing for it right now? You need to study and to learn. I am learning, Papa. I like learning very much, and I try my best. What are you learning? What subject? Again, he didn't understand the question right off, but then he replied, I learned the whole subject. Just as soon as I chase it up to the speed Mama Anastasia has, I shall immediately understand the whole subject. Or all the subjects. Yes, it is better to say that. All the subjects. What do you chase up to speed your Mama has? My thought. But for the time being, I cannot chase it up as quickly. Mama's thoughts run more quickly. Her thought is quicker than my grandfather's, quicker than a ray of sunshine. She's so quick that only he thinks faster. Who? Who's he? God. Oh, yes, of course. Still, you have to try. Yes, you must try your best, my son. Fine, Papa. I shall try even harder. In an effort to continue the conversation about learning without saying something stupid and meaningless, I reached into my backpack and pulled out a book at random, one of the books I had brought with me. It turned out to be a grade 5 textbook called A History of the Ancient World. I explained to my son, You see, Vladimir, this is one of the many books people are writing today. This book tells children about how life began on the earth, how man and society developed. It's got a lot of good color illustrations, along with printed text. This book outlines the history of mankind. Scholars, they're such smart people, well, smarter than others, or so people say, have described in this book the life of primordial people on the earth. When you learn to read, you'll be able to learn a lot of interesting stuff from books like this. I know how to read, Papa. Really? Your mom is teaching you to read? Mama Anastasia once drew the letters for me in the sand and said their names out loud to me. Do you mean to tell me you've memorized all the letters right off? I did. There are very few of them. I was sad to learn that there are so few. I didn't pay any attention at first to his remark about the fewness of the letters in the alphabet. I was interested in hearing whether or not my son could actually read a printed text. I opened the book to the first page and handed it to him, and I said, Here, try to read this. Chapter 2, Conversation with My Son, Part 2, A Distorted View of History. He took the open book in his left hand for some reason and spent a few moments silently looking at the printed text before starting to read. The earliest people lived in hot climates where there were no frosts or cold winters. People did not live by themselves but in groups, which scholars call human flocks. Everybody in the flock, from the littlest to the greatest, collected food. They would spend whole days searching for edible roots, wild-growing fruit, and berries, and bird eggs. After reading this text aloud, he raised his head from the book and began looking me straight in the eye, inquiringly. I said nothing, not understanding his query. His voice betrayed concern as he began talking. Papa, I do not have any concept from this. What kind of concept do you mean? No concept at all comes to me. Either it is broken, or it cannot present a concept of what is written in this book. When Mama Anastasia or my grandfathers speak, I have a clear concept of everything they say. When I read his book, the whole concept is even clearer. But from this book, I have only a distorted kind of concept. Or somehow, it is broken within me. What do you need this concept for? Why waste time on a concept? The concepts come all by themselves when there is truth being told, but here it is not happening. That means, one moment, I shall try to check. Perhaps the people written about this book had no eyes if they had to search all day for food? Why did they spend days searching for food if it was always right with them? Then something inexplicable began to happen with the child. He suddenly shut his eyes tight and began feeling the grass around him with one hand. Upon finding something, he picked at it and ate it. Then he got to his feet and said without opening his eyes, Perhaps they did not have noses either. He pinched his nose tight together with his fingers and began walking away from me. After proceeding about 15 meters, he lay down on the grass, his hands still covering his nose, and uttered a sound something like, ah. At that point, it seemed as though everything around sprung into motion. Several squirrels jumped down together out of the trees, spreading their paws and fluffing out their tails like a parachute. Running up to the child laying on the grass, they would put something down beside his head and then dash back up to the trees and again parachute down to the ground. 3 wolves, standing some distance away, also came running up to the boy lying on the grass and began hovering anxiously around him. With a noisy crunch of branches, a young bear appeared, toddling quickly along, and then a second bear, a little smaller, but more agile. The first bear sniffed the child's head and licked his hand, which was still holding on to his nose. Various other creatures of the taiga, big and small, kept popping out of the bushes. They all began to hover anxiously around the little fellow lying on the grass, completely oblivious to each other's presence. It was quite evident they didn't understand what was happening to him. I, too, could not understand at first my son's strange actions. Then I figured it out. He was portraying a helpless person deprived of sight and smell. The little sound, ah, he kept making from time to time were to signal to those around him that he was hungry. The squirrels kept arriving and departing as before, bringing cedar cones, dry mushrooms, and something else besides, and piling them up on the grass beside the child. One squirrel stood up on its hind legs, its front paws holding a cedar cone. With its sharp teeth, it began quickly extracting the nuts inside. Another squirrel bit the nuts open and made a pile of freshly shelled kernels. But the boy did not take the food. He continued lying there with his eyes closed, his hand holding his nose and uttering ah with growing insistence. At this point, a sable came running headlong out of the bushes, a beautiful fluffy creature with a luxuriant coat of fur. It ran in 2 circles around the boy, paying no attention to the gathering cluster of animals, and the creatures whose attention had been totally focused on the unusual behavior of the child did not seem to take any notice of the sable at all. But when it suddenly pulled up sharply and stopped at the pile of cedar nuts the squirrels had shelled and began eating them, the creatures reacted. The first ones to bare their teeth and have their hair stand on end were the wolves. The bear, which had been swaying back and forth, shifting its weight from one paw to the other, first froze still, his gaze trained on the glutton. Then he gave it a slap with his paw. The sable flew off to one side and flipped over, but immediately jumped up again and made a nimble dash for the child, putting its front paws up on his chest. Directly, the little one tried to make his usual demanding ah. The sable brought its muzzle right up to the boy's open mouth and deposited therein the food that it had just chewed. At long last, Vladimir sat up on the grass, opened his eyes, and let go of his nose. He surveyed all the creatures around him, who were still showing signs of concern. Then he got to his feet and began to calm them down. Then each creature, in its turn, according to a hierarchy known only to them, approached the boy. Each one received a reward. The wolves got a friendly clap on the mane. With one of the bears, Vladimir took its muzzle in both hands and gave it a shaking, then for some reason rubbed the second bear's nose. He used his leg to press the sable, squirming at his feet, to the ground, and when it flipped over onto his back, he proceeded to tickle its tummy. After receiving their due reward, each creature in turn respectfully withdrew. Vladimir picked up a handful of shelled cedar nuts from the ground and made a sign to the squirrels, which by all appearances was intended to let them know they need not bring any more gifts. Even though the child had been calming the creatures down, up to this point the squirrels had been continuing to feed him, but stopped immediately upon Vladimir's signals. My little boy came over to me, handed me a fistful of nuts, and said, In the concept I have within me, Papa, when the first people began to live on the earth, they did not need to spend entire days searching for and gathering food. They did not need to think about food at all. Forgive my concept, Papa. It is not at all what the intelligent scholars wrote about in the book which you have brought me. Yes, I realize it is quite different. I sat down again on the hillock. Volodya immediately followed suit and said, "But why are they different? My concept and the one in the book." I'm sure my own thought must have been working faster than ever before. Indeed, why was this book, a textbook for children, containing such hocus pocus? Even an adult unfamiliar with the wilds of nature must grasp the fact that in a warm climate, especially a tropical climate, there would be all sorts of food in abundance. So much so that the huge creatures, mammoths and elephants, had no trouble finding anything to eat, and the smaller animals didn't go hungry either. And yet here was man, the most intelligent and intellectually developed creature among them, having difficulty feeding himself? Really, a virtually impossible scenario. It turns out the majority of people who study history simply do not think about the implications of what is written in history textbooks. They do not evaluate what they read against the criterion of the most elementary logic, but simply accept the historical past in whatever form it happens to be served up to them. Try telling a doknik, for example. A doknik is something like a country cottage, but always with a garden where enough fruits and vegetables are grown to feed the family through the winter. Try telling a doknik, for example, a doknik with just 600 square meters of land, that his neighbor spends his days walking among the food growing there and can't find anything to eat. The doknik would get the impression that his neighbor must be sick, to put it mildly. By the same token, how could a child who has grown up in the taiga and tasted all the various fruits and growing plants imagine any need for searching for them if they are always at hand, especially when the creatures around him are ready at any moment to serve him, to spare him the necessity of climbing the trees to fetch the nuts, and even the task of shelling them? Earlier I had observed still another phenomenon. All the female creatures living on Anastasia's family territory accepted the child born to her as their own. And I am not the only one to have described this phenomenon. There are many instances recorded where animals have nourished human children, and many people, no doubt, have observed a dog feeding a kitten or a mother cat feeding a young puppy. But animals have a special relationship to man. Creatures in the taiga always mark out their territory. It is on such a territory that Anastasia's family lives, and hence their special relationship with her, too. How is it that all the creatures are so drawn to man and ready to serve him with their heartfelt desire? How is it that man's loving attitude is so essential to them? Just like household pets in a modern apartment, cat, dog, or parrot, for example, and each and every one tries to get at least some kind of attention from man, and treats any indication of love as the ultimate reward. They are even jealous when man shows attention to some pets more than others. While this is something we easily take for granted with pets, it may seem a little unusual here in the taiga, yet fundamentally it is the same amazing phenomenon. All animals aspire to feel the invisible light of grace, or feelings, or some other kind of radiance, emanating from man. The specific term may vary, but the fact is incontestable. The important thing is the real nature of this phenomenon, and we need to understand its specific purpose. Did this phenomenon exist really right from the very beginning, or has man trained the animals over the centuries? It is quite possible that every single one of them has been trained. After all, look at how many different animals and birds are all on all continents serve man today. They know who their master is. In India, we are talking about elephants and monkeys. In Central Asia, camels and donkeys. And almost everywhere, this applies to dogs, cats, cows, horses, chickens, geese, hawks, and dolphins, and so many kinds of creatures, it is hard to name them all. The important thing is that they are in service to man, a fact practically everybody is aware of. But where did it begin? 3,000 years ago? 5? 10? 10,000 years ago? Or was it possibly this part of the Creator's thought right when he created nature? Most likely the latter. It says in the Bible, to determine the purpose of every creature. If all of this was planned and implemented right from the beginning, then man could not possibly have had any problems finding food. Then why do all of our history books, those written for adults as well as children, say the exact opposite? This happens not just in our country, but such absurdities are inculcated into people the world over. A mistake? Probably not. Whatever is behind this is more significant than a mere mistake. Design. If so, that means it's important to someone. To whom? Why? What would happen if history were written differently? If the truth were written, what if textbooks all over the world started something like this? The first people living on our earth did not have any problems finding food. They were surrounded by a great variety of high quality and nourishing food. But then the question would arise in the various majority of minds. What happened in this great variety and abundance? Why is man today forced to work as a slave for someone just to earn a piece of bread? And perhaps the most important question of all, how flawless is the course of human society's development today? How was I now to answer my son as to why this intelligent book, a textbook, was spouting such absurdities? People in the tropics spending whole days searching for food. To one brought up in the taiga, surrounded by faithful creatures, these sayings of so-called intelligent people were patently absurd. I remembered Anastasia's words. To perceive what is really going on in the universe, one need only look into one's self. In an attempt to extricate myself from the situation, I tried explaining to my son, this is not a simple book. You should examine everything written here against your own concept. Why write about something that you have such a clear concept of already? Here, everything is presented upside down. You need to use your own concepts to verify whether something you read is the truth or whether it's turned upside down. You need to be more attentive to that. Do you understand me, Vladimir? I shall try to understand, Papa, why people write what is not true. And at the moment, I do not understand. I know that some creatures use their tails to wipe out their tracks. Others build fake burrows, and there are those who even construct traps. Only why do human beings need to be so deceptive? I told you it's for their self-development. But can they not develop themselves through the truth? They could do that too, but it would be different. Where you live, Papa, do they develop themselves through the truth or through lies? Well, they try all sorts of things. Sometimes truth, sometimes lies. Whatever will get them ahead most effectively. Anyway, Vladimir, do you often read books? Every day. What kind of books do you read? Who gives them to you? Mama Anastasia has given me all the books to read that you wrote, Papa. I read them very quickly, but every day I read other books. Books that have a lot of different happy letters of the alphabet. At first I didn't pay any attention to his words about some kind of strange books with lots of different happy letters.